Welcome to Love 2.0, an insightful conversation about God, love, and sexuality. Our mission is to educate, equip, and inspire you to experience the love you deeply desire and deserve. Our goal is to show men and women the intersection of God, love, and sexuality so you can experience life on a whole new level. That's Love 2.0. I'm your host, Michael Oden. Now let's dive in. So, guys, we are continuing our series here with Dr. Corey. In our previous series or previous episode, we discussed how fighting over money could potentially land you in divorce court. We gave a lot of tips and insights on how you can identify if your marriage is heading down that route. Dr. Corey was graceful enough to even include some resources and tips and things of that such that can help you to avoid that type of situation. Now, in today's episode, we're changing gears a little bit, and we're going to be talking about how fighting over parenting styles can potentially lead you into a divorce situation. So, with that being said, Dr. Corey, appreciate you coming back and gracing us again with your presence and insight.
Good to be here.
And before we kind of start talking about fighting over parenting styles and how that could potentially lead to divorce, for those who hadn't saw you on the previous episode, just give us a quick, again, background as to on the practice that you have and those that you serve.
So I'm Dr. Corey Carlisle. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified Christian sex therapist. I've been in private practice for about 13 years now. Most of that time has been working with couples and individuals as it relates to marriage and sexuality. Over the last several years, I've started shifting focus to start focusing on men as well. Part of what I realized in working with couples over those years is that a lot of good men came in, but they didn't know how to get out of their own way. And so they were causing a lot of issues in their relationships just because of their personal hangups and the like. And so I want to start focusing and helping them to get out of their own way so they can learn to live with greater freedom, power, and love throughout their life in relationships. And so still work with couples, still deal with sexuality, still deal with all of that. But now there's a subspecialty of working with men as well.
Gotcha. You know, that's a perfect dovetail into our conversation today about fighting over parenting styles. You mentioned that in your practice and your time that you've engaged with a lot of good men. And I would assume, and I want you to professionally correct me, that a lot of these good men may have challenges in engaging with their wife about parenting and parenting styles simply because a lot of them maybe came out of household situations where both parents weren't there or both parents weren't healthy when they were present. And that's led into challenges and frustrations, et cetera, and misguidance on how they now parent themselves. And even I would assume that probably applies to the women as well. What's your thoughts on that?
Agreed. Where we bring our family with us, the family we grew up in, our family of origin. Excuse me. We bring that with us in our mindset when it comes to raising our own kids. Sometimes doing exactly what they did. Sometimes doing the opposite in reaction. But then many times there's, I guess I would call it almost like a parenting neglect, where if we don't have good models, then we don't know how to, if I don't have a good model of a father, then I'm at a loss of how to be a father myself. And so I need, whether that's my biological dad or others around me, to learn, all right, what does being a father, what does that actually look like? And if I don't have those models, then again, I'm at a loss. So I can pick up some things from culture, but functionally I'm still at a loss because no one has taught me by providing a role model. And so then if I'm married to someone who has expectations of, all right, here's what parenting looks like, they're now putting demands on me based on their orientation. And it can be good stuff that they're suggesting. But to me, if I'm at a loss, I'm like, that makes no sense. You're asking me to do something and it just doesn't compute because I don't have that model. I don't have that orientation, that worldview to come from. And so a lot of times we're bringing our assumptions into our parenting, and now we're at gridlock because we don't understand some of those underlying assumptions that we make as far as what does it mean to be a parent, mother, father? Like, how do we do this dance? If we're not understanding some of our internal narrative, then we're often, again, at gridlock with each other.
Wow. Man, you uncovered to me, you went deep and uncovered a lot in just that one statement. how can a person really even begin to sit down with themselves and even challenge or ask themselves, where am I receiving, as you call it, my parenting orientation or narrative? Like, how can one even begin to have that difficult conversation with oneself to even be able to then from there take a next step?
Obviously I'm biased. I would say counseling would be a great place to to do that. But outside of that, it's truly sitting, like, we all have childhood wounds.
Mm,
And so regardless of how good our parents were, they're not God. They were not perfect. And so
mm,
they wounded us in some way. And so even if they were present, loving, whatever, there's some wound there. That doesn't mean that it was a traumatic wound, but there's some, again, they were imperfect. And so it's
mm.
taking time to sit with that of what did I receive or not receive from each of my parents, and how has that affected me?
Wow.
And so just taking time to acknowledge and maybe even grieve that wound, that, man, I wanted my dad to do this. I wanted my mom to do that. And they didn't fill that void for me. Can I at least acknowledge that with it in myself? And now part of adulthood is still taking responsibility, that maybe my parents didn't provide that role model for me, but as an adult, I still need to search those role models out. And so I can't use that as an excuse that, man, my parents never taught me how to be a parent, and so I just get a pass. No, you don't get a pass. Part of your adult responsibility is figuring out, okay, who are those role models that I can now learn from today? And now integrating that into today.
Wow. So you uncovered a lot when a person is able to intimately say to themselves that, my father or my mother did not provide this for me, or something that I needed or wanted and desired. And so that leaves a hole or a wound that one way or another you need to, as you said, take responsibility to feel.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned seeking out role models. Some people don't even know, like, who.
Yeah.
So I asked the question of, can you at least just kind of throw out one or two, thoughts of a potential role model that a man or a woman can begin to look for to be able to say, that person may be a good role model, even when to have a conversation with, potentially, et cetera, around parenting. Any thoughts there?
What comes to mind is first just praying for it.
Mm,
And so God is ultimate father, ultimate mother. And so, all right, God, how are you fathering me? How are you mothering me? And so, how are you bringing people into my life to fill this void, to help heal this wound? Because God is an infinite God, and so it may come through a random person at the grocery store that just says that word that blesses you that day. I don't know.
mm.
And so it may not be an ongoing relationship, but God is an infinite God. He knows how to meet those intimate needs. As far as an ongoing relationship, it is looking around your community. And so, is there someone at church or small group or neighborhood that can fill some of that for you? Thinking about the older generation in particular, that sometimes they are longing for someone to need them, to want them. And so, to ask for an older person to mentor you, they would probably jump at that opportunity because they would love to pour into the next generation. So, looking for those opportunities in everyday life, where I think there's certainly a lot of value in having flesh and blood mentors there. The other thought is being able to, even fiction characters
Mm.
are a way to model. And so it is, like, I grew up watching The Cosby Show. Regardless of the characters or the actors on The Cosby Show,
I appreciate that clarification.
the show itself is still a good show as far as husband and wife and parenting and engaging and the like. Um, And so you can even turn to fictional characters to still say, even though that's not quote unquote ideal, that's not real life, is it still gesturing towards something that is good,
Mm.
that is beautiful, that is true, that God has called us to? If so, then regardless of how it's presented, then all right, yeah, can I learn from that? Can I lean into that?
I like that. The inanimate as well as the real life flesh and blood mentorship that you mentioned. And I'll echo your suggestion about finding people within your community who have a little bit more time and wisdom on you.
Mhm.
And I personally, there's a gentleman that I meet with, Ed. great resource. I met him while working on a board for a charter school, and he and I just struck up a genuine friendship. And we get together, we try to get together once a month just to talk, share, etc. And in my conversations with him, I'm looking for insight into the things, primarily money, parenting, etc., just as you mentioned, to help guide me down a straighter, narrower path so that I can have the life that I desire, right? Have the life that I deserve.
Right.
And I'm using his experience to help me get me there.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a great, excellent suggestion.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for resources couples can engage with if they have issues around this parenting thing? You mentioned counseling, you mentioned mentors, but are there any other resources or maybe a book that comes to mind? I have one that kind of comes up, but do you have anything that kind of comes to mind for you?
Not a particular book. I take that back. Gary Thomas' Sacred Parenting. What I like about his book is that it's more of a shift in your mind. So it's a reorientation of how you think about parenting versus a how-to manual. And so a lot of the issues that I've had with some of the parenting books is that it's a how-to. And so here's how to fix your kid. Here's how to do this. And sometimes that's helpful. But as parents know, certainly if you have multiple kids, kid number one and kid number two are generally not the same at all. And so what works for kid one is not going to work for kid two. And so now it's like, all right, I have to reinvent the wheel, it feels like. Versus with Sacred Parenting, Gary Thomas's book, it is, all right, how is God using parenting to grow you up? And so parenting is part of your discipleship. And so, yes, you're pouring into your kids, but God is using this for you as well. And so it's more of a shifting of your mindset. And so how can I use this, yes, to grow me up and grow my kids up in a discipleship sort of perspective versus, all right, what do I do with my kids in this particular area? I think those, particularly if you're having like sleep issues or problems at school or bullying or whatever, I think finding those particular resources for that can certainly be helpful.
Gotcha.
But how do you shift your mindset around parenting?
Gotcha. I like what you said about, there's not really a checklist per se. So one of my parting questions is, and you and I talked about this, but how can we raise our children, or how can we integrate biblical principles into our parenting, right? To help guide our children and to help them develop strong character. Because to me, in my mind, character is a big issue that we have in today's society. We see it with people who are even running for president, who are governing our states and cities, et cetera. And so how can we as parents integrate biblical principles into our parenting to guide them spiritually, et cetera? What's some thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I think it starts with desire, vision, and will to do that. And so do we want to integrate? Do we want to live by God's standards, even in our parenting? Or are we just looking for the quick fixes? And so is God's standards, does it truly orientate every aspect of our life, including our parenting? And so if we have that desire, back to some of the role models, all right, who are those people that I can look to, those resources that I can find to cast a vision? Like, I want to do that, but can I now cast that vision of what that looks like to integrate God's standards into our parenting? And then am I willing to follow through on that? And so when Johnny and Susie and all of them are doing everything at school, and our kids want to do the same, will we stand by God's principles in that moment that, yes, just because everyone else is doing that, that's not who we are as a family. But we have to know who we are as a family. We have to know those God standards so that this is not just something we're imposing onto you, which may be another way to come at it. Are we living by those standards ourselves as parents? And now we're setting that culture in our home. And so part of what we're doing is setting a culture in which this is just what we do in this family, is to live by God's standards. And that plays out in our parenting as well. And so the things that we're asking you to do, that's part of our aspirational values as well. And so we're not asking you to do something that we're not doing ourselves, or at least trying to do ourselves. We're not going to be perfect, but at least trying to do ourselves.
Gotcha. I like what you said. And I think that it really sums it up about setting a culture. Because a culture is not a checklist. A culture is, this is just the the spirit from which we live and how we
Yeah.
do things, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
folks who are really into sports, there's a thing, heat culture, right? It's just a drive hard, work hard mentality, leave it all on the court, no BS, etc. It's not a checklist per se. It's a energy in terms of how we do things. And so I think that what you stated there is a good takeaway for couples who are looking to either identify can I integrate biblical principles or just have a well-rounded approach within our parenting is really think about the culture that you want to develop within your household, because that is what will ultimately your children will leave with. I'll add to that. One thing that I personally do with our kids is, I started reading the Bible with my oldest daughter when she started middle school, and over now she's in high school, and I'm still reading the Bible with her and the little one because I take both of them to school in the morning. But one of the things that I realized is small chunks work a lot better in terms of developing that culture and integrating the biblical principles into kids versus sermons, right? And what my children and I do literally is we go through the book of Proverbs. Proverbs has 31 chapters. Whatever the day of the month it is the chapter of Proverbs that we read.
That works.
And I only pick one verse, or if it's a verse that, encompasses two, we just pick one point out of however many is in that particular chapter. We read it, and then we talk about what do you think it means, and then we're done. And that happens literally in under 5 minutes, more like 2 to 4 minutes generally. So that's just one tip that I would share with folks as they're thinking and listening on this conversation.
Yeah, like I said, those nuggets where sure there's a place for sermons, but as far as day in, day out, it's just those nuggets of information of being able to, all right, let's chew on that. And then there's a cumulative effect that happens that over time, your daughter from middle school to now high school, as she gets ready to launch, it's like that's now embedded into her soul. Yeah, that's cool.
It's literally like seeds that you're
yeah.
So in parting, there's one question I want to ask you. A lot of couples have challenges with this. They invest a lot of time going to work, commuting, kids sports. Kids sports nowadays is like a part-time job. And they find themselves not really having bandwidth for themselves personally. So one of the things that we had talked about is how can couples ensure that they prioritize self-care to maintain their well-being while parenting? What's some things that you can help people, one or two things, maybe to get over that quote unquote parenting guilt?
What comes to mind is one, just being aware of that need. Often once kids come into the family, a lot of things get put on the back burner. And so our couple time often gets put on the back burner, and our personal time often gets put on the back burner in some ways, because particularly in those young years, kids just demand a lot of attention. And then, as you mentioned, as they get older, in some ways it's different attention, but still a lot of attention with the ball games and recitals, and you're just always on the go. And so aware of that neglect, touching back on culture, what is the culture that we want to set for our home? Do we want to set the culture in which we're always on the go? Have we overextended ourselves? Do we need to shift how we're doing life just as a family? Have we spread ourselves thin? Where we don't have margin for ourselves as a couple, we don't have margins for ourselves as an individual. And so that may be one thing to consider. And then on the more personal level, it is fighting for that time, both as a couple and individual. And so is it, hey, you take the kids this morning, and I'm going to have some time with my guy friends, my girlfriends, or whatever, or we're carving out some time where we can just be ourselves and do those things. It's not that we ever check out of being a spouse or ever check out of being a parent altogether, but it's nice to just be ourselves individually as well. Where that's part of what attracted us to each other as husband and wife is our individual personality. And so how can we have and carve out some time to remember that, to remember who we are, and to care for our own souls in that way. A lot of it for me comes back down to intentionality of knowing that as a need, and it's okay to be. Soul care is not selfish. Soul care is caring for, it's stewarding your soul, it's stewarding your heart, so that you can better serve both your spouse in the marriage and your kids. That if you're depleted, I have nothing left to give them. And so you being intentional about your self-care or your soul care is the best way that you can actually bless them. And so it's not a point of guilt. It's actually part of your responsibility, part of your duty is to steward your own vessel well, and that will be part of that soul care.
Gotcha. I like that, and I appreciate that. I hope that for those of you who are listening, you picked up on the fact that soul care is going to enable you to be a better parent, a better spouse, a better person. And so it's a necessary aspect of your overall plan for life. In parting, one thing I always tell people is everything in life needs maintenance, right? Your car needs maintenance. You go to the barbershop to get a haircut. Your wife goes to the beauty salon to get her hair done, etc. If you look at all of the high performing athletes, etc., LeBron James, the list goes on. Those guys aren't playing the sport 24/7. Do they play it often? Yes. Do they play with intensity? Yes. Do they play it 24/7? No. If they did, their bodies would literally burn out and break down, and they would ruin the gift that they have. So I would just like to encourage folks to identify the fact that taking time for yourself outside of your parenting duties and responsibilities helps you to be a better parent.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Corey, with that being said, does your practice still have the capacity to potentially help families who are dealing with, fighting over parenting styles?
Yeah. I am still open. See clients in person in Swanee, Georgia, and online. And so, yeah, if I can help you in any way sort through some of these parenting challenges, happy to join you in that story.
Gotcha. So, guys, look, if you are local here to Georgia, or even if you are outside of the state, Dr. Corey can be an excellent resource to help you and your family move through these issues. Contact information is below. And with that said, guys, we appreciate you for joining us for another edition of Love 2.0, where our mission is simply to educate, equip, and inspire you to live the love that you so deeply desire and deserve. With that being said, I'm your host, Michael Loden. We'll see you on the next time. Talk to you later.